On the quiet, upscale street of Orchid Crescent in Lekki, Lagos, lived a man whose very presence was a poison. Ebenezer Okoro was the undisputed king of petty malice. His wickedness wasn't loud or explosive. It was a slow, steady drip of venom, delivered with the calculated precision of an assassin. He didn't just dislike his neighbor, the retired and gentle Professor Adebayo. No, Ebenezer despised the old man's quiet contentment, and he made it his personal mission to tear it down, piece by miserable piece. Mr. Adebayo's greatest joy was his small, perfectly kept garden, a personal sanctuary filled with rare orchids and fragrant jasmine. This peaceful green space became Ebenezer's battlefield. Every Monday morning, without fail, at precisely 6 a.m., Ebenezer would fire up his ancient, notoriously loud lawnmower. He'd position it right outside Mr. Adebayo's bedroom window, knowing full well that the professor's chronic health condition required calm, restful mornings. It was a weekly alarm clock from hell, but that was just the start. On Tuesdays, he accidentally spilled generous handfuls of corrosive rock salt along the edges of the professor's pristine flower beds, a silent killer for the delicate roots and soft ground cover. The entire wealthy neighborhood watched this slow-motion cruelty with a mix of pity for Mr. Adebayo and a deep-seated fear of Ebenezer. You see, Okoro owned the sprawling corner plot, a massive property that gave him a sort of feudal authority over everyone else. His reputation for vicious lawsuits was legendary. He once sued a teenager just for a frisbee grazing his expensive imported fence. So, no one dared to interfere. No one spoke up. Through it all, Mr. Adebayo endured with a quiet, stoic dignity. He retreated further into his home, his books, and what little energy he had left. His once vibrant joy was visibly fading with every passing season of torment. He never fought back, never raised his voice. When their paths crossed, he would offer Ebenezer a slight, weary, heartbreakingly polite nodded gesture that only seemed to fuel Ebenezer's malice even more. The air on Orchid Crescent was thick with tension, perpetually shadowed by the wicked man on the corner. Just when it seemed things couldn't get any worse, Ebenezer's campaign of cruelty reached a devastating new low. Mr. Adebayo's beloved son, his only child, passed away unexpectedly while studying abroad. The tragedy shook the entire community. Neighbors rallied around the heartbroken Professor Brinchenfuth, offering comfort and helping in any way they could. But where others saw grief, Ebenezer Okoro saw an opportunity. His mind, completely devoid of empathy, recognized the old man's profound distraction and vulnerability. He immediately accelerated his plans for a massive new construction project on his property. This wasn't just a renovation, it was a full-scale demolition and rebuilding effort. Knowing Mr. Adebayo was lost in sorrow, Ebenezer ordered his crew to begin the loudest, most disruptive demolition work at midnight. Imagine that. The jarring, grating noise was unbearable, a relentless violation of the peace the morning professor so desperately needed. The constant choking dust from the round-the-clock construction settled like a funeral shroud over the entire street. The constant presence of construction workers meant Mr. Adebayo was effectively trapped indoors, unable to even find solace on his own veranda during his darkest hours. This merciless siege dragged on for months. 3 years later, Ebenezer's monstrous new home was finally complete. A 3-story steel and glass behemoth that towered over the neighborhood. It was designed not for comfort, but for aggressive, ostentatious display, a monument to his unchecked ego. It was, admittedly, an architectural marvel, but its immense height created a permanent environmental disaster for his neighbor. The colossal structure cast a massive, impenetrable shadow over the north side of the street, and, specifically, over the entirety of Mr. Adebayo's once sunny, vibrant garden. The place that had been his sanctuary was now plunged into a perpetual, chilling darkness. The very source of his joy had been snuffed out, starved of the sunlight it needed to survive, all because of the spite of one man. The garden began to wither, its colors fading to a dull, sickly brown. The rare orchids drooped, their petals curling in the gloom. The jasmine, once so fragrant, now smelled only of damp earth and decay. But even as his last source of solace died, Mr. Adebayo's spirit, though battered, refused to break. He continued to greet Ebenezer with that same quiet, polite nod. a testament to an inner strength that his tormentor could never comprehend. One morning, a new family moved into the house directly across from Ebenezer. The Johnsons were young, vibrant, and blissfully unaware of the dark undercurrent running through Orchid Crescent. They had two small, energetic children who quickly filled the street with the sounds of laughter and play. For a brief moment, it felt as though a ray of sunshine had pierced the gloom. Ebenezer, of course, was furious. The joyful sounds of children playing grated on his nerves. He began his usual tactics. Early morning noise, passive-aggressive notes about their parking, and cold, intimidating stares. But the Johnsons were different. They weren't easily intimidated. When Ebenezer complained about their children's laughter, Mrs. Johnson just smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, we'll try to get them to laugh a little more quietly, Mr. Oak." The neighborhood watched, holding its breath. This was the first time anyone had pushed back, even in such a gentle way. Ebenezer was not used to being challenged. His face would contort with rage, but the Johnsons' cheerful resilience seemed to baffle him. He couldn't find a legal loophole to exploit their happiness. Meanwhile, a subtle change was happening. Inspired by the Johnsons' quiet courage, other neighbors began to emerge from their shells. They started greeting each other more openly on the street. They organized a small neighborhood watch. They began having weekend barbecues, deliberately filling the air with the sounds of community and friendship sounds that Ebenezer couldn't stand. The shadow of his mansion still loomed large, but the emotional shadow he had cast over the street for so long was beginning to lift. Mr. Adebayo, seeing this transformation, started spending more time on his front porch again. He would watch the Johnson children play, a faint, genuine smile gracing his lips for the first time in years. He even began a small container garden on his porch, cultivating shade-loving ferns and a small act of defiance against the darkness. Ebenezer Okoro was still rich, his house was still enormous, but he was becoming isolated. His power was built on fear, and as the fear began to dissipate, so did his control. He was the king of a shrinking kingdom, trapped in his magnificent, empty fortress, surrounded by a community that had finally decided to choose light over his darkness. The price of his spite was becoming clear. He had built a monument to his ego, but in doing so, he had walled himself off from the very human connection that his neighbors were now rediscovering, and in the end, he was the one left alone in the dark. What a powerful story about resilience and community. It really shows how kindness, even in small acts, can overcome the deepest malice. Thank you so much for watching with us today. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. We'll see you in the next one.